Today's guest is Conor Malone, coach, creator, and the kind of guy who lives and breathes what he teaches. In today's episode, we're going to dive deep into stoicism, self-discipline, and the mindset required to actually live the values that most people just post about. This was a really interesting and fun conversation about mental fortitude, why most high achievers secretly crack under pressure, and how to build your own inner citadel brick by brick. If you're tired of the fluffy motivation that you see online and you're ready for some honest self-reflection, then this episode's for you. Conor, welcome to the pod.
Thank you, mate. Good to be here.
Now, we are both almost like a lover and into the realm of stoicism. I think that's where we find like mutual commonality between us originally, and we've definitely kind of like jammed on that a few times. For those that are listening, how would you define what stoicism is?
That's a great question. So to me, stoicism is, first of all, obviously an ancient philosophy. I think one of the cool parts about it is the fact that this was like 2,000 years old and that it's still so applicable to today. But the way I like to explain it is the main kind of concept, the driving principle behind it all is this idea of the dichotomy of control. The real everything that we hear from all the Stoics that wrote was all about this idea that there are some things in life that we can and some things in life that we can't control. And at the end of the day, the only thing we can always control is how we respond to things. So for me, that's the big kind of core principle of Stoicism.
When did you first come across it? And what was it that you think that was so compelling to you to dive into it to the depth that you have?
Yeah, so for me, it was, my self-improvement, if you like, started around 19. I started to read, listen to audiobooks, all these different things. And I came across Stoicism maybe a few years in. I think it's a natural pathway in self-improvement. At some point you get into Stoicism. Obviously, philosophy as a whole is quite a complex subject. I was always kind of interested in it. But for me, it was kind of standoffish because a lot of it was they're using very big words, very complex. But Stoicism was quite an entry-level thing, especially with Ryan Holiday, all the work he's doing on it. Reading one of Ryan Holiday's books usually gets us into it. But I think for me, it was from YouTube. I'd seen some videos talking about I used to research the type of guys that I wanted to become, like Kobe Bryant and things like that. You look at these guys with these elite level mentalities and they're always referencing stoicism. And I'm like, okay, well, what is this? And then the more I started to look into it, I was like, this is pretty cool. How the kind of whole thing works and this whole guiding principle of the dichotomy of control. So for me, it started from looking at YouTube videos and then reading from the Stoics, like obviously Marcus Aurelius' meditations, reading Seneca, Epictetus, reading their books, and then going into Ryan Holiday's books as well. So for me, that's where it really came from.
No, it's a really interesting point that you raised there as well around like accessibility. I think I remember for some reason when I was younger, when speaking, and we're talking like real young, speaking to adults, and you would almost assume that they would be talking the boring chat of like politics, philosophy, and it's like those things get grouped together, right? And it's like this big amorphous word of like, well, what does philosophy at large mean? And again, I think when I was younger, I probably just put it into the same bracket of BS, like politics that I never really engaged with. And I think for myself, I can't remember the actual point where I fully like immersed myself into it, but I would imagine the entry point was very similar where I started to see things online. And I think actually I would, very similar to yourself, start to read the self-development books, and there would just forever be references of like Plato, of Marcus Aurelius or Socrates or whomever. I'm like, who the fuck are these guys? And I bought this tiny little book. You remember you used to get those books that were like An Idiot's Guide to?
Yes.
And I think I bought like An Idiot's Guide to Stoicism.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, this is pretty cool. Like as you say, dichotomy of control. And that was very relevant for me at that point in my life where it was quite turbulent and I was potentially like stressing out about things that ultimately I couldn't control. So it made me feel like I had more control and autonomy and whatnot. And then I think, yeah, to your point there, like it's the accessibility key where there's not a ton of jargon. Obviously meditations, which we'll touch on as well, I like the fact that it was, I'm just reading someone's diary and their daily thoughts. So I think that's it's really interesting. What I'm keen to find out about yourself is like, what was it that made you, for lack of a better way of putting it, like fall in love with it so deeply?
The thing for me was Marcus Aurelius specifically, this idea that there was this guy that was a philosopher king. He was the most powerful man in the world. He was a Roman emperor, yet he was still able to be controlled, disciplined, temperate, courageous. He was able to be just with his actions. To me, that was so cool. I was like, it amazed me, especially if you compare it to business. Like, I mean, you'll know this as well when you're surrounding yourself with a lot of people within business. There's a lot of ego there. To think that the most powerful man on the planet didn't or often wasn't overcome by ego and was able to be so controlled, so disciplined, so calm, so wise. To me, that really aligned with what I want to be as a man. Like, to be the type of guy that can be, yes, authoritative and yes, wise, but also just totally in control, doesn't need to act a certain way to impress other people. So he had everything he could ever want, yet he still chose to study philosophy, which tells you a lot about stoicism as a whole. If the most powerful man in the world with all the riches you could ever have could have anything he ever wanted, yet he still chose to study this, it was pretty cool to me. So that was really one of the things, the story of him.
It's that root of constant improvement and self mastery. And I know, obviously, with your business being the pursuit of improvement, right, and
Yep.
constant improvement, I think there was an element of that was so attractive about him too. Where externally he had everything, anything that he could have possibly wanted in the material realm. He could have had power. He had, in the outer world, he had everything at his fingertips. And it was just really interesting for me to be able to see that even with that abundance, he was still so committed and curious about like mastering his inner world and not just the outer world, as kind of like fluffy as that sounds. And like you say, with the ego piece, there are so many people who are just unaware and blissfully unaware. And it's that opening of Pandora's box when you start prodding around and asking yourself kind of quite deep and meaningful questions. And I think also like challenging yourself. You can never close that box again. And it's interesting to see someone from such a distance back in such a great degree of power who is still doing that.
Yeah.
It's nuts. Yeah, crazy. Now, one of the key concepts I really wanted you to break down is this concept of the inner citadel. Something that I often in my own personal life kind of use as a frame and a mental model, and I take myself to on a frequent basis. What's your explanation of what an inner citadel is?
Yeah, so for me, I came across the concept. There's a book called The Inner Citadel. Obviously, Ryan Holiday talks about it a lot when he talks about Marcus Aurelius, this idea of an inner citadel. Because when we think, particularly in life, we think of the external things. How strong does someone appear? How do they look? Like, what are the material things they have? But an inner citadel, that's your fortress, your mental fortress. To me, that's how I explain it. Your inner citadel is your mental fortress. The way that you talk to yourself in your own head, what you allow in, what you don't allow in, that's really key, because some people have little control over that. You could be high flying on the outside, but if you let all these external things affect you and you let that in, you don't have a fortress. You don't have this inner citadel. Fortress is the word for me. And building that, there's so many different ways that you can build that. You can strengthen that. For me, it's been huge in life, especially in business as well, because as you know, it's so turbulent at times. And to have a strong inner citadel just helps you push through.
Absolutely. It is that visual of having like a castle or a fort almost like surrounding your brain, and everything you're doing is to protect the walls, like the four walls, as it were, around your brain.
It's a great way to, it's a really great visual that you just mentioned. It's like, if you think of your brain as that fortress, and you can ask yourself that question on a regular basis, it's like, how well am I maintaining my inner citadel? How strong are these walls? Or are they being, what am I allowing to penetrate my inner citadel? These walls, these city walls, that's the way that I would always be looking at it from there. And for me, it's like, right, am I living in alignment with my ideal self? Am I doing the things I know I need to be doing? That strengthens those walls. As soon as I start to distance myself from that, this fortress, there starts to be some cracks in the walls, starts to be some seeps through. You know what I mean? And it's like just constantly going back to the things that you know you should be doing to, replenish that and make sure it's as strong as you need it to be.
The reason why I really like that as a visual, where your brain is on the inside of the walls, is the walls can be cracked, as you've referenced, from either the outside or the inside. So the idea of the external world, whether it be business or the stresses that just come with being a human, those things externally can try and penetrate that wall from the outside, which is probably the more common way of viewing the inner citadel and the idea of that fortress, and that our daily practices, rituals, behaviors, attitudes, all of these things help to callous that mind and callous and strengthen the fortress. But I've come to recognize also in myself and clients that I work with and many people I speak to, it can also be cracked from the inside out, in that you can do the cracking. And that's where a lot of the attitudes come in, your internal monologue, the way that you actually try to protect where you spend your mental energy, your information diet, and things like that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a great point. It's a really great perspective. Again, it's like you got this fortress, but everybody thinks of how it's, and I just mentioned that, how it's been penetrated from the outside. You look at the external things. But yeah, how do you talk to yourself? What are you doing to maintain that inner part of your inner citadel? It's a great point. I've never looked at it from that perspective, but the visual itself is a great piece. And then both internal and the external, looking at it from there.
100%. 100%. Now, with that being said, like in your experience, in your own life, your own journey, and also like with the people that you work with, what have you recognized to be like, a couple of things within business owners, high performers that causes those cracks to happen?
A lack of self-awareness is a huge one. So particularly recently, a few recent clients that I've started working with, both business owners, the thing that I picked up straight away from them was a lack of self-awareness. It's like they have this idea of, first of all, what they want to be and all of these things and what they think of other people, but they have no understanding of them, of their own selves. And to maintain an inner citadel becomes so difficult then, because they don't even know what they're defending. They don't even know what they internally want. So it's like a huge focus on internal, not the external things. That's a big one for me. Self-awareness, as I said, that's the lead to that. So helping people become more self-aware is what I use as a tool to build that inner citadel. What about you? What do you think?
I would say like this game doesn't exist without self-awareness. So I wholeheartedly agree with that in the you can't fix a broken leg if you don't know it's broken. So the idea of like this as a concept won't even be digestible if you don't have any form of self-awareness. I think just by like hearing this as a conversation, as a concept, it's like it causes introspection. So what does that mean? And then you start exploring like I actually can protect my brain and so on and like my mindset and whatnot. So I think that almost encourages that element of introspection, which is required for obviously the self awareness. But I found there are so many things naturally in the external world that cause that penetration if we're not careful. I find the uniqueness that people don't consider to the point that I raised earlier is that internal warfare, and a lot of that comes down to like self-limiting beliefs.
Yes.
Comes down to like a really negative internal dialogue. And again, there's many reasons why those things are present, but I would say they are some of the biggest culprits for taking chunks out of that wall.
Yeah, not following through in your word. That's a huge one. It's
Yeah,
like the inner self-talk is huge, but it's like as soon as you start to not do the things that you say you're going to do, and you're wondering why your mindset's not as strong, it's a huge part of that. It's a huge part of obviously self-belief, self-confidence. But when we envision that whole inner citadel, yes, people can attack it from the outside, but to break that down on the inside can come down to you just not following through in your word. It's something that happens how many times every single day do you make these decisions? You say you're going to do all these things. It's constant.
okay, so here's a concept that's just landed in my brain right now as we're talking about that. So the idea of it is a wall, it's dynamic and it's live. So it's not like one day there's a wall there and that's just it. The idea is that it is constantly eroding through the elements. So the stronger the wall, the more of a beating it can take from the external world, right? So there are always going to be things that are going to try and penetrate the wall. Your job is to maintain the strength of the wall as much as possible. You do that through positive practices that we'll discuss in this episode. But you've also got the other side, which is the not following through on your word. And if we look at that like in its literal sense of not doing the thing, you're not building the wall. And thus, if the wall is not getting stronger, it's getting weaker, which then means that if you do that for a prolonged period of time, the wall becomes weaker with every single attack that comes to it, to a point of which where there are just massive gaping holes in the wall and we're constantly taking damage.
There's a visual I really like to use with clients, and it's this idea of obviously that we build self-confidence and self-belief by fulfilling the promises we make to ourselves. And if you envision that as your self-confidence, your self-belief, and you look at this as the inner citadel wall, as every single brick on that wall is a promise that you make to yourself. Every time you fulfill a promise, you add a brick to that wall. It starts to build. Every time you make a promise to yourself and you don't fulfill that and you don't follow through in your word, a brick is then removed. So it's like, and it's so easy to do that. Like, oh, I'll get up at this time. Oh, I'll do this task. Oh, I'll go and do this for so and so. You forget, you don't do it. Bricks are being removed from that wall. Your inner citadel is becoming weaker, and you're doing that from the inside out. Nobody else has to do anything. That comes down to you.
100%. And that forces you to take this sense of ownership and responsibility for your life and for that wall. And I really like that because it's active and it's always active. I think the idea of whether you do or don't do, something happens is important, because otherwise we can fall into this, which I would say the majority of just humans do. We fall into this passive state of, well, I know I'm not progressing it because I'm not doing the things. But in our mind, we think, well, it's not getting worse. But when we understand the principles of life and everything is based upon polarity, you've got light and dark, you've got on, you've got off. So things are getting better or they're getting worse. Things are growing or they're dying. That is it. There's no middle ground. Time will pass whether you're doing the thing or not. And that is it. That's the evolution of life. And then we put that into this analogy and this metaphor. You are either adding bricks or you are actively taking them away. It's not that you're either adding or nothing happens. You're either strengthening or actively weakening. I think that's a really nice, active and dynamic kind of visual.
Correct. Yeah. It's that whole idea. Obviously, when I talk about the idea of constant improvement, it is that life itself is a constant pursuit. We can't just build the wall and be like, right, okay, let it hold there. We'll leave that and it'll sit there. No, it won't. It'll erode. It'll erode. And these choices, you think of how many times every single day we're forced to make decisions, we're forced to make promises to ourselves, tell ourselves we're going to do something, whatever. It's constant. There is no end to this. So it is a constant maintenance of this inner citadel, which at first can seem daunting. But once you start to realize, if you build some consistency with that, it's quite a fulfilling journey. Every time you fulfill these promises, you feel good. Every time you strengthen that wall, it feels good.
This is my jam. I talk about this shit all the time, as I know you do, and we both love this. But why is it so important to fulfill upon your promises that you make to yourself? And then also, why do you feel that most entrepreneurs, high achievers struggle with building that consistency up?
So the reason it's so important over time is because, as I said, that's where your self-confidence comes from. Like every time you tell yourself, you think of like people will complain, they'll be like, oh, I'm just not confident. I just don't really believe myself. And it's because they constantly set unrealistic expectations. Coming to your second point there, it's always everything comes based off an unrealistic expectation. They tell themselves, if it's within their personal life, that let's say they wake up at 8 a.m. Oh, I'm going to go to waking up at 6 a.m. every single day of the week. Unrealistic. Could be within business. It could be with to do with, could be targets. It could be set non-negotiables within the business. They're going to go from working X amount of hours to then double that in a week. These are all unrealistic expectations, and they continue to make these unrealistic expectations and think, well, I can never follow through in it. But that's the reason why. And over time, as we said, that erodes at that wall. It's such a critical part. I mean, when I look at all the clients that I have from the external, they seem confident. They seem like they know their shit and they're on their shit. But then as soon as you talk to them and they open up a bit, you realize that the reason they're not is because they're internally not fulfilling the promises they make to themselves. On the surface, within the business, they might be. But when this is something that you've spoke about before, it's like you tell them your missus, you're going to take the bins out, take the fucking bins out. Like you say, you're going to make dinner tonight, make dinner tonight. It's all of these things. There's so many aspects of life because yes, you might be high flying in business. You might have a high level of self-belief, but within your relationship, your self-belief is just like your word is so much more important, not just to yourself, but to others. If you want others to trust you, you need to follow through in your word. So it's a huge aspect of that.
100%. And I always like to put it into that frame as an example because it can feel quite conceptual and hard to grasp. It's like, well, what do you mean by fulfilling on my word? Because often what we believe, right, is that when we talk about integrity as a word, which is one that I love and it's so strong and powerful, it's usually spoke about in the context of like business from a business to customer and consumer. It's like one of our core values is integrity. And it's like we do what we say we're going to do, which is often a farce anyway. But what's in my mind far more important is that you maintain that level of consistency with self, right? And I like to then put it into that example of imagine if it's Thursday today. I had said to you for the past 5 Thursdays in a row, like, let's hop on this podcast. And an hour before the podcast started, I dropped you a message and said, sorry, mate, I've got to cancel. Upon that 6th time, if I'd have asked you to rearrange, you wouldn't have believed that it was going to happen because I've given you no evidence for that to be the case. So through me bailing and not fulfilling on my word and my commitment so many times, you've started to lose trust in my word. And most people are able to really obviously and clearly rationalize with that and see how that would happen. A lot of people have potentially got flaky friends that are like that or whatever. But they don't realize that for that relationship between me and you to deteriorate, it's taken 6 weeks. But within yourself, that can happen within 6 days because of how many mini micro commitments that you break. And that's how quickly that integrity and self-belief and self-trust can really start to erode. And that is a very kind of tactical way of you looking at it, whether it be from making the bed in the morning because you said you're going to, or, getting up at the time you said you're going to. It's that balance and nuance between doing the thing you said and making sure the thing you said is actually in alignment with where you are right now.
Correct. Exactly. And again, the realism of the expectations is based on that. It's like, you want to become this type of guy? Great. Do the shit you say you're going to do. Follow through in your word. Whereas, and that's like, it's a great point. Integrity is a great word of that. Because you want to build, if you want to be relied upon, as a man specifically, you have to be like, you have to have integrity. You have to follow through in your words. So it goes with every aspect of life. You want to build a strong inner citadel. You want to build a strong relationship. All relationships, it comes from that following through in your word, doing the shit you say you're going to do. That's that brick wall that you're building.
Have you read the book, The Six Pillars of Self-Esteem?
No, I've not.
Mate, read that book.
Yeah, who's
Yeah.
by? You go? It's up there.
Nathaniel Brandon, I think.
Nathaniel Brandon.
Nathaniel
Okay.
Brandon.
Yeah. Good
One of
book.
the best books that I've ever read.
Wow.
Yeah, like
Statement.
I that could be like a confirmation bias also because of the point that I read it, but
Okay.
it just completely changed like my mental model of the world and like myself, that relationship with self. So as a high level view, basically he goes through what are the six critical things that we need to take into consideration when it comes to building one's self-esteem. There's a really cool like section as well around how you nurture self-esteem within kids and how imperative that is for later development, etc., which I found really interesting. So if anyone's got kids, I think that is a non-negotiable read, whether you want to be a parent or you are a parent, to read that book. But one of the key pillars is integrity. And that's where it really broke down like the actual definition of integrity and the idea of like, what does that actually mean? Because confidence, for example, like what does confidence mean?
Yeah.
For a lot of people, it's like a really subjective word. And that was the first time that I was able to really break down these words that I hear quite frequently into almost like an objective definition. And it was like, cool. When it's objective, it then becomes, do I or do I not have that? As opposed to kinda sometimes. And it just massively helps with that. Am I or am I not in this very moment with this decision I'm about to make, acting in alignment with integrity or not? And it shouldn't be a kind of, it's like, it's a yes or it's a no. And that level of binary really helped me to create mental models, like you said earlier, of I am either adding a brick or I'm taking a brick away. So that was a really awesome book. Now, another thing that I kind of want to reference, well, I'll ask you the question first. Why do you feel so many people who are high performers, high achievers, set those unrealistic expectations that ultimately end up setting themselves up for failure?
Brings us back to the awareness. Like any form of change starts with awareness. If they lack self-awareness, they lack understanding of their own capabilities, they can't make realistic expectations. I think one of the big things, obviously, and this is something we might even get onto, the idea of obviously happiness and how like happiness equals reality minus expectations. People just, they almost feel they're entitled to an extent. This can happen within business. If you've been, maybe things have been going well for a certain period of time, you become entitled. People in life become entitled as soon as they start to do things by themselves. They've got such a high expectation through entitlement that no matter what they believe is going to happen, it's just it's not reality. It's so far from reality that it's going to be so below that. So yeah, I think entitlement is a huge thing to do with it. I mean, the antidote to that is always gratitude. I think that's a huge thing, which within business people sometimes mix that up with contentment. Like they're like, oh, if you're really grateful, then that means you're not driven or whatever. Two totally separate things. So yeah, the whole expectations things comes down to a lot of it is from entitlement, gives them exceedingly high expectations, which they're never going to fulfill and follow through on.
Nice. No, I like that as a viewpoint as well. And it's so accurate that when you try to encourage people to practice gratitude, especially the driven, they believe that by celebrating their wins and recognizing what they're grateful for, it's all of a sudden going to strip them of their drive and their want to succeed.
I heard I was listening to Modern Wisdom today, the CEO of Whoop, I think is Will Ahmed, I think his name is. He was talking about that like a few days ago. It's a really good point, and how like obviously he was very metric driven in the beginning. What he done was he looked himself for two different perspectives. He used to look at himself as like Will the CEO and then like Will the human being himself. So it's like, but he would tie them both together. So it's like the success of Whoop would determine his self worth, which, as you'll know from experience, I know how critical, like how damaging that can be. If you tie it to a metric, particularly within business, your self worth to that, it's a horrible place to be in. And it comes back to the whole expectations piece as well. But no, it's an interesting concept.
Yeah, I feel that viscerally. I remember for a really long time, like someone who's been in business for about a decade now, still something I work on like all of the time. It's a lot less prevalent because I've, it's intentionally tried to spend so much time not doing that and building an actual sense of self that if you are your business, fucking hell, it's a really volatile journey, like internally as well as externally. And that's when it causes a whirlwind of problems where you start questioning, not just the external of like, does this business idea make sense? Does it have product market fit? It's, if the answer is no, well, I'm a piece of shit. And you then carry around the shame of that. And that then means that like failing, which in business happens all of the time. And ultimately you need to fail lots to create MVPs and iterate and yada, yada, yada. You don't fail quick enough. You fail once and you go, well, that's it. I'm an idiot. And it doesn't work. When actually, if you look at pretty much like Edison with the light bulb, 999 ways of not building a light bulb to get to the one. If that is someone whose self-worth is wrapped up in the light bulb, you do it maybe once or twice and you're then like, I'm an idiot. I can never make a light bulb.
Yeah.
And you're 900 and however many away from actually getting it right.
How do you deal with that? Because for me, it's a journey for sure, separating your own self-worth from the business. What have you done in the past to work on that?
I think when I recognized that it was at its worst is that there was no me outside of work. And as someone who has a hunter's brain, which is something that gets referenced a lot in my audience, it's a tendency when your brain gets excited to just fully dive in to the thing. And that's something I've been massively, when I say guilty, it's not even necessarily a bad thing to do that, right? It can be a superpower, but there's always a shadow to everything when it becomes overextended. I've gone through like large periods of time, we're talking like years, where I've not had anything else. So when someone asks me, what do you do outside of work? I laugh. It's like, what do you mean? There isn't an outside of work. And that's when you don't have any foundations to reference or build upon. So the kind of the antidote to that really then is actively making sure there is a Jack outside of being a business owner.
Yeah, it's a great point, man. Same for me. Like really looking at that, because you do become so focused and absorbed and working 7 days a week. And when you go, like I found myself, I'd go to review my week and I realized that my weekly reviews were purely business based. And I'm like, hold on, how can I end this week feeling proud or fulfilled if all I do is measure it against the business, which a lot of those metrics are out with my control. To bring it back to that stoicism piece, it's like, yeah, there are things I can, obviously the whole idea of output versus outcome, I can remind myself of that, but if all the things are just metrics, it's all business, then yeah, I'm never going to feel it. I'm never going to separate myself from that. And that was a big one for me as well. It's like realizing that you are more than just a business. So difficult at times, but I worked on that a lot. Still am.
I think it's a never-ending journey. I like to view business, because of how much energy is wrapped up in business. It's like a vortex that's constantly sucking you in. And your job for people like us is never going to be, try and force yourself to work a little bit more. It's going to be the case of you just continuously need to be trying to ensure you don't get sucked in to the degree where there is nothing else left. And that's when you start to really feel the damages of doing so. Now, it's going to happen periodically depending on like projects and seasons of your life, but that's where that self-awareness comes in, is having those practices and the self-awareness to be able to objectively look, I've been in this vortex for like 3 months now. I probably need to readjust and rebalance and find some equilibrium in my life again.
Yeah. It also highlights the importance of like other people in your life. They're the ones to remind you. So when you distance yourself too much, if it's just you in the business all the time, there's nobody to remind you. Hold on, like zoom out a little bit and remind you of who you actually are. It's a huge one. Your support systems is big on that, and self-worth.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember I spent a good like 2 years working under the stairs, and like Harry Potter, like that's literally how, if that's what you're visualizing, that is how it looked. I didn't see anyone because I'd moved. My partner either didn't have one, or the one that I have now, she lived a long way away from me at that point. So just me in a random city, and I just didn't see daylight ever. And that was when you don't realize it at the time that you're so sucked in, and it's only when you come up for air as such, you then start to look at, wow, like I'm incredibly stressed out all the time. I'm very like snappy. My central nervous system is all over the place. Like all of these symptoms that it's really difficult to see, because a saying that I absolutely adore is, it's hard to read the label when you're inside the bottle. And that's the purpose and the beauty of having other people in your life, is that they're not in the bottle, so therefore they can read the label for you.
Yeah, brilliant. It's brilliant vision, that. Brilliant perspective.
I want to circle back to what you mentioned, which is the dichotomy of control. Explain that for those who don't quite yet understand what that means. Like, try and break that down into like tactical real world examples as well, if you can.
So one of the best ways I like to explain it is the fact that if you look at two people, one would be a stoic as such, somebody who practices stoicism, and one person who doesn't, which is most people. They have wildly different expectations of life because they don't understand the difference between what they can and what they can't control. So imagine you had to turn up to a train station. You're getting the train, maybe you're going into work, it's early in the morning, maybe you'd slept in through your alarm. You'd slept in, you weren't having a great start to the morning. You turn up, you're waiting for the train, and the train doesn't show up. It gets cancelled. Now, that is out of your control. I think everybody can agree that that's out of your control. You can't go and physically move that train and get it to come back. So for you to then get angry at that, it's totally out of your control. So you're then giving the power over to external things. Now, the thing that we can control in that situation is how we respond to it. So are you the type of person who starts throwing their hands in the air and shouting and swearing and complaining? Or are you the stoic on the other hand who look at it and say, okay, well, that's not ideal, obviously. You're going to obviously have that initial emotional response of, oh, for fuck's sake, why today? But after that, it's right, how do I respond to this? You can look and say, right, well, I can get the next train, or maybe I can get a taxi. You take action. That's the difference. So again, it comes down to how we choose to respond to things. It could be the fact that we're walking down the street and it starts to rain and you start to get annoyed by the fact it's raining. Something that is totally out with your control. The weather, what people think of you, what people do and say, totally out with your control. Now, one of the things that people get mixed up with the dichotomy of control is they think, right, well, if it's out with my control, then why should I even care about it or bother about it? That's not the case. The case is you can influence everything. Like, I can influence how you think of me based on how I speak to you and all these things. I can't ever control that, but that's the key thing to understand. So rather than us getting ourselves into a hole and thinking, oh, so-and-so said this, or this situation is this, within business, it happens all the time. Things are out of our control. Things happen. Clients leave. Clients are going to leave all the time, okay? Throughout our careers, throughout business, clients are going to leave. You need to look at it and say, right, what aspect of this could I have controlled? Could I, like, how do you respond to that? Do you improve aspects of your service? Or do you start and complain about it and say, oh, I don't know why they left or whatever? The response is up to you. That's the key part about it. Everything's going to happen. There's good things and bad are going to happen to us in life. But what we can always control is how we choose to respond to that.
Interesting point that you raised there around, I see this less so now. When I first got into stoicism, when potentially I was like searching around on blogs, Reddit, all that type of stuff, like, what the fuck is this? You would see the opposing argument, which is either those who are throwing rocks at, or people who misinterpret what stoicism is when they get into it, and they kind of overextend. And it's that place where they find themselves of just apathy.
Yeah.
Where they're like, well, nothing matters then. And
Yeah.
people, I think, misinterpret stoicism from being cold and heartless, and therefore you can't care about anything. So you're at like this flat line. You can't get excited about anything, and therefore you can't get sad about anything. I think you make a good point, is that that's not the case. You're able to feel the emotion. You just don't need to judge the emotion.
Exactly.
And it's what you do next that actually matters.
Yeah. People think a stoic doesn't feel emotion. Of course they do. Everybody feels emotion. It's just how they respond to it that's different. It's like if we use the unfortunate situation of death, like the Stoics have so many interesting perspectives on death. They say this phrase, it's a Latin phrase, memento mori, remember you must die. And people think like, well, that's a horrible thing. Why would you tell yourself you're going to die one day? Because it reminds you of urgency. It reminds you that death is out of your control. But what you can control is the fact that you're alive right now. How are you going to utilize your day? That's something that's within your control. So it's a constant, to me, it's an optimism thing, total optimism. But you're right, it is, everybody looks at stoicism and say a stoic is somebody who doesn't feel emotion. A stoic is somebody who just negates everything in life and says, oh, I can't control that. It's not the case at all. They take ownership for everything. Everything that they can control, they take ownership for, and they control how they respond to things.
Yeah. And that sense of urgency, like I've literally got memento mori tattooed on my wrist there, where it's just a helpful reminder of everything is finite. And when you look at it through the lens, and life through the lens of its finiteness, you recognize that nothing really matters that much. And that instantly alters how much attention, time, energy that you give to it.
Yes.
And I think a really helpful thing that Ryan Holiday speaks about is the two eyes that you have. You have the subjective eye and you have the objective eye. And I remember when I first understood that as a theory, I was like, oh, this is amazing. I speak about this quite frequently with clients, in that nothing in life is good or bad. It just is. And like, I got a coffee. I've got a brand new MacBook. If I was to knock this coffee over and it would go onto my MacBook, it just is. That's just happened. My impression that I put on it by seeing the world through my subject eye leaves the impression of whether it's good or bad. And that's based upon a myriad of different things. And, you know, most people, myself included, would at times be super frustrating. Like, for fuck's sake, why has this happened to me? This is so incredibly bad. But what I've found is that as best as possible, if I can almost like consciously like look through the other eye of it just is, it has just happened, that dramatically changes my experience of life to the degree where I haven't really vocalized this much in public. I think it was 2023. My mum got sepsis and was like critical care on like death's door. There was a day where it was like, cool, she's gone. I was in Australia at the time, so can't do anything. Like, completely out of my control. Can't even like get there. And as you can imagine, a super emotive kind of like topic and subject, etc. And I remember like actually doing that as a kind of mental model and a mental task of course, I love my mum and there's no disputing that. And it's not the case of, well, I don't care. Going back to what we were saying a moment ago, right? It was it doesn't matter how I feel right now. This is happening. Like, it just is. It is happening. So I can't get back to the UK in time. So do I allow this to like completely consume me to the point of being debilitating, or do I give her what she needs right now, which is support, etc.? And again, it's not that I'm not upset or worried or sad. It's just that I was able to modulate how I responded and thus gave her exactly what she needed in that moment, as opposed to like flying off the rails, as an example.
Correct. A great example of it. I mean, indifference is the whole idea of indifference. It's like we can choose how we respond to things. We can choose how we perceive things as well. Like you said, the idea of obviously spilling the coffee in the MacBook. I speak about this to people all the time. There's this Marcus Aurelius quote when he talks about like, he says, in the morning, remind yourself that the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are like this because they cannot tell good from evil. And that is the point. It's like people cannot tell. Like people, they constantly label things good or bad, this or that. Things are just that. They're things. Such as life. It's obviously it's due to our how we choose to see it. And you chose that. And obviously you see this as a tool, by the way. This is all a tool. Indifference is a tool to help you cope with that, because you're never going to escape those emotions of, for example, in that day with your mum, you're never going to escape that fear and the sadness as such, but you can control it. You can manage it. And the way that you manage it is by using indifference as a tool, the dichotomy of control as a tool. And then because you think of it, everybody else, especially as a man, they need you. As a supporter, they need you to stay strong. So that's going to come down to how you respond to it.
What have you found in sense of practices that's helped to work on that and bring awareness to that on a frequent basis?
I mean, I remind myself of that every day. The whole dichotomy of control I have. I suppose you could call it an affirmation in the morning. But that quote I just explained to you, the Marcus Aurelius one, totally changed my perspective on other people. It's like, so basically what he was saying in his journal, he was reminding himself that every single day I will deal with people who are ungrateful, they're dishonest, jealous, and surly, all of these things. So I remember when I used to work in a gym, there was some great people there, amazing people. But typically, Monday morning, it's pissing with rain outside, people are going to be negative, right? So you're in there at 5:45 in the morning, people are coming in. What do they say? They say negative things. Oh, it's miserable outside. Monday again, this and that. I had prepared myself for that.
You're
So
also the last person they want to see on a Monday morning in a gym as
shouting
well.
at them. Yeah, exactly. But again, I've expected this because I'm preparing myself, thinking, like, it's a Monday morning. What do you expect? But for people to be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. That's how people are going to be. So rather than me thinking, oh, the world's such a depressing place. Why is everybody so depressed? It's just how it is. So reminding myself of these quotes, the Memento Mori one as well, reminding myself on a regular basis, because these aren't things that you just hear once and it changes perspective forever. Something that needs to be a constant reminder. You have it tattooed on yourself. That's why, because it's a constant reminder. You can't just say to yourself, memento mori, and then you'll never waste time for the rest of your life. We all do, but we need that reminder on a constant basis. Like, listen, you're going to die one day. So let's make the most of today. Let's make the use of our time.
100%. And there's that quote of most of us need to be reminded more than we need to be taught. And it's that idea of, it's not a magic wand. You don't just, you say it once and everything falls into place and you forever remember it. I can't even remember what I ate yesterday. Right. So it's like, I need these important reminders tattooed on myself. And I think that's probably what the majority of my tattoo art is going to be later towards my life. If you inspect my body, it's just going to be reminders to self for important philosophical things that I need to bring awareness to.
I like that. What have you got any ideas on your next one? Any philosophical reminders you would get tattooed on yourself?
I'm thinking of getting my left leg as a kind of massive piece, sleeve, patchwork, bass vibe on all of like the theme will be the Stoics.
Wow. That would
Yeah.
be pretty powerful. So anytime you're pissed off, you just whap your leg out and you're just like, right, okay, start to read your leg.
That's it. Especially when you're doing squats. I'll be like,
Yeah.
that reminder that I need. Yeah,
Yeah.
100%, man. What would you say is a common misconception for like high achievers and entrepreneurs when it comes to mindset? Because one thing that I've noticed is that it's this dichotomy again of those types of individuals are uber busy and they are up to their eyes in typically the things that we want to avoid. And we find ourselves, and I say ourselves because I am usually one of those as well. That's why I have to do this work, rationalizing as to why I don't have time to do these things and why like mindset as this big fluffy idea is not something that I need to protect or build an inner citadel, etc. Like, what do you recognize is it maybe a misconception that stops people engaging and doing this work?
Well, I think, not sure if it's a misconception, but I think so many people think that they are mentally stronger than they are. They believe that they can deal with things, but the thing is, they're just putting up with it. They're not actually dealing with it. There's a huge difference between, for example, let's say overwhelm, somebody who experiences overwhelm and somebody who controls it and deals with it. It's such a common thing in the sense of like, because like every entrepreneur experiences overwhelm, every entrepreneur experiences stress and anxiety, and they just assume that they're dealing with it in the right way. When in actual fact, if they had a little bit more self-awareness, they realize that they're from the inside out breaking themselves down. And just to come back to that point and the importance of mindset, like I had an athlete on my podcast the other week. He's an MMA fighter, and he was speaking about how he studies all of the greats, particularly athletes, but businessmen as well. I've never met a successful entrepreneur who hasn't emphasized the importance of mindset. I genuinely haven't. I've met a lot of struggling entrepreneurs who haven't mentioned it, but the importance is just, especially guys later on in their journey, the guys that you look up to with the way that they respond to the world, the way they see the world, the Patrick Bet-Davids, when you look at the kind of more celebrity ones, if you like, these people that you look at, they all emphasize mindset. And I think it's just a lack of awareness in the beginning for a lot of people. So once you have that understanding and awareness of all these things and how you respond to things, how you deal with things, that's the first step to actually building a strong inner citadel and dealing with things better.
I think you're spot on. I think the point of I too have never met an individual who is uber successful who hasn't put emphasis on how much you need to train your mind and your body is to the same degree as that you train for your business. I think especially when you're an entrepreneur, right? The way I frame this to my clients is that you're an athlete. You are a mental athlete. That you're getting paid in relation to problems that you can solve, whether that be in your own business or within the marketplace in the world. That is all it is, right? And that's how you create value and that's how you innovate. Yet we don't treat ourselves accordingly. Like if there was, go back to you saying Kobe Bryant, right? When he was at his peak and people reference his training habits and his routines, he would drill and drill and drill, and he would be there before everyone and he would be there after everyone. And we can all see why that makes sense and how that translates to a great performance in his field and in his arena. But I don't think people understand or acknowledge the fact that their arena is mental work. And that is the ability to, as I've said, solve problems. That is the ability to communicate. That is the ability to lead both your clients and for your team. All of this stems from what is happening in between your two ears. So if we acknowledge that as being your arena, I think people then will appreciate that you need to put the training in just like Kobe Bryant would for basketball.
Yeah, I think so. I think people need to really look at the examples of the people around them. You literally look at them. If I think of it for myself, the people who I admire the most are the people who deal with things the best. And the people who deal with things the best are the people with the strongest mindsets, the best perspectives on the world. And all that comes through inner work, like self-work. The most self-imploding business owners that I know, and I know a good few of them, are those that do not focus on their inner work. It's all external. And like you say, that comes back down to implosion. Those inner walls break down. Everything collapses.
I too know a few. And it never ends well. It never ends well because, again, you rationalize with the, like, just so if there's anyone listening who thinks that this is just like a novel idea of, oh, yeah, it sounds nice, but I ain't got the time for that. It's like, you don't have the time to not do this.
Yeah.
Because you're going to be forced at some point to confront or acknowledge this because it will tell you when you need to look at it, right? Because otherwise you end up imploding. And that is what I see happen for so many entrepreneurs that don't prioritize this, is that it's this implosion and then very, very quickly there's that beyond the inflection point, things start going horribly wrong and cascading. And I've seen this where marriages break down. Really important business deals and contracts are then lost because as I say, it's this domino effect. You lose the marriage, you lose your head, you're unable to regulate your emotions and the way you communicate. You say the wrong thing at the wrong time. The client's like, I'm not working with you anymore. You lose a massive contract. You then lose the office because you can no longer pay. And it's just this cascading effect. And it's too late at that point. No amount of manifesting in the morning and doing your journaling is going to be able to undo the work because the wall is falling down.
Yeah. Yeah, your best work will come from internal strength. When you're strongest internally, your best external work will come from it. I think because people, you think of it, the biggest decisions you ever have to make, you're going to make better decisions the stronger you are internally. Whereas the weaker that is, the weaker the inner citadel is, the more you're going to struggle to make these big decisions with clarity, with certainty, and everything then begins to implode, like you said, and it's a domino effect.
Absolutely. For you as an individual now, like for you personally, what's been like your biggest lesson when it comes to something that you've learned in relation to your own mind?
Returns back to the expectation piece. I'd mentioned this very briefly earlier on, but there was a concept I heard from Mo Gaudat. Do you know Mo Gaudat? Have you heard him? Yeah, obviously he's former, I think he was possibly CEO of Google X, very high up with Google X, very successful guy within business, but and within life. And this concept he had around happiness was that happiness equals reality minus expectations. And it closely ties into the dichotomy of control, but it's the idea that if you have too high expectations of life, then life will forever be below your expectations and you will never be happy. When I went to an event a few months ago with Dr. John Demartini, that's what he said. He says, like, depression is a result of unrealistic expectations. It's when people think, when they're entitled, they believe that certain things should be a certain way, decisions should go their way, outcomes should be in their favor. That isn't reality. That isn't how life works. Whereas if you have that expectation that everything is good, everything's going to go your way, that's not how it's going to work. So you're forever going to be expecting more than reality. Whereas if you do things like practice gratitude and you understand that, listen, these things could go wrong, these things that are out of my control may well go the opposite way, but I know internally I have this strong inner citadel, I'll be able to respond to it in the right way, that everything will be fine and I'll keep going, I'll keep pushing forward. That's the strength that we need. So anybody that's listening that's potentially found themselves in depressive times in their life, you can quite easily relate that back to your expectations. If you're feeling constantly down and like nothing's going your way, look at your expectations. What are you expecting of others? What are you expecting of yourself? What are you expecting of the things that are out of your control? You're probably going to find that they are exceeded expectations, and often reality doesn't quite get to them. And the antidote there is gratitude.
Yeah. No, I love that. And you kind of referenced it there with that gratitude piece. If there was a singular or maybe a couple of really powerful practices, whether that be daily, monthly, weekly, whatever the cadence is that's appropriate, that somebody would massively benefit from starting to integrate and introduce into their life, what would you say the few are?
I mean, one of the simple ones is obviously daily gratitude practice. Everybody's heard of it. You write down 3 things you're grateful for, but it's not just writing down from 3 things you're grateful for. It's meditating on that for a second. There, I don't mean closing your eyes and crossing your feet in a basket. I mean actually thinking about it. Like if you're grateful for, maybe it's family members, maybe it's your kids, maybe it's your partner, maybe it's the fact that you have running water, maybe it's the fact that you have a house, a roof over your head. You have access to food, whatever you want. Our phones, a great example of it. We can do anything we ever want in this world. All these things we take for granted. Think about the things. Marcus Aurelius said that. He said, think of the things you value most and think of how difficult life would be if you didn't have them. Like, think of all these things that you have right now, the things that you value most. If you didn't have them, how would life be? And that's a good reminder for us. Another one that I use is I track my achievements and experiences, I call it. So every single month I go back on my life, I go through my camera roll and I look at what I've done. So maybe it could be something as simple as going on a day trip with a friend. It could be going to an event. It could be a holiday. It could be a bigger thing, whatever it happens to be. But I'm constantly reminding myself. So I can now look back for the past, I've got this for the past 6 years. For the past 6 years of my life, I can see everything I've done in every single month. And it just reminds me, you're so lucky. Look at all the things you're doing. Look at all the abundance you have. Whereas if we don't take note of these things, we lose track of them. And we start to think, oh, well, maybe we don't have as much as we actually should have, but that's bullshit. It's a lie that we tell ourselves.
I really like the lens as well of, as you just referenced, what would life look like if you didn't have the thing?
Yeah.
And that typically induces the feeling of gratitude, because think of times where you feel so grateful, or the inverse, you feel like you are lacking. It's in those moments, right? As we've all had, when you have ill health for a period of time, the only thing you care about is getting better. That's it. Like, even if you've just got like a man
Block
flu,
those. Yeah.
yeah, and you're just like a block nose,
Yeah.
man, I've never taken for granted
Yeah.
breathing through my nose so much in my life. And you're like, I will never take it for granted again. I'm gonna love it.
Mm.
It's trying to feel that level of gratitude without having to induce the and experience the pain of not having it, like in real life.
Yeah.
So I like that as like a frame. It's what if there was something that was absent from today that would really bother me or
Yeah. That's
deplete the experience of my life, what would that be?
yeah.
And that then gives you almost like a hint as to what you should be grateful for.
Exactly. It's like that's exactly as Marcus Aurelius said. Look at what you have, the things you value most, and think of how much you'd crave them if you didn't have them. That's your prompt for every single day. What are those things that if were to be removed from your life, it just wouldn't be the same?
I like that. That's the main takeaway I'm going to have, which leads me on to my final question. If there is like a singular thought that you'd like people to leave today with, whether it's been something we've already covered or something that you feel for yourself over the past 2 years that's been revelationary for you to understand, what would that be?
Bringing it back to the dichotomy of control, but being specific in the sense of how we're viewed by others. I think this is something I've taken into life, and I think most people naturally do it without even knowing it. We're not judged by what happens to us in life. We're judged based on how we respond to it. So you think of all the people you admire most, usually they're people who have went through hardship, but they've overcome it. They've come out the other end. Those are the people. Those are why we watch movies. Those are why we listen to podcasts of the guy that had a business, failed, had another business, failed again, but then he came out on top. But those are the people we truly admire. And for me, that just reminded me, like, see, anytime I do fail, anytime things are going wrong, thinking like this is it. Like, was it Hormozy says, like, this is the story that you will one day tell yourself. You will remind yourself of this, like, oh, remember that time when everything was going wrong? You thought the world was collapsing around you, but you overcame it. That's what a true admirable person is, somebody that's overcome difficulty. So I would say that again, it's not that we're judged based on what happens to us in life, it's how we respond to it.
Hey, it's been a pleasure having you on. I really appreciate your wisdom, your insight, and you taking the time today to share that with everyone. Where can people find more of your work?
Appreciate that, man. So the best place to find me is on Instagram, Conor Malone PT. That's where I upload all my content. I have my own podcast, which can be found there, The Pursuit of Constant Improvement, which is my whole philosophy on life, is this idea that life is a pursuit of constant improvement. There is no end path, no end goal to life. It is exactly that, constant improvement.
Amazing. I'll get that put into the show notes so everyone can go and access that. And I urge everyone to do so because constantly spitting out absolute knowledge bombs and obviously talking largely around things that we've discussed today as well.
Yeah, appreciate it, man. Thank you for your time.
No worries, man. Great to have you.